Killer Innovations Podcast for Monday, May 30th, 2005, show number 12, coming to you from Washington, D.C. Hello, this is Phil McKinney, and welcome to this week's podcast. Please keep in mind that the opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily reflect those of my past, current, or future employers. As the upfront announcement pointed out, I am in Washington, D.C. I've just completed my travels through Southeast Asia. The last two podcasts, for those of you who are new, and if you go back and download the last two, the last one came from Bangkok, Thailand, and the one before that came from Bali, Indonesia. Pretty interesting trip. I shared on the end of the last podcast, the one from Bangkok, kind of my opinions and observations of what I've seen in Southeast Asia. So this week's podcast is coming from Washington, D.C. It is going up a day late from the normal schedule. I usually put it up either late on Saturday or early on Sunday. But the old bodily clock is out of sync, given the 28 hours it took me to travel from Singapore back to Washington, D.C., getting back here over the weekend. So a little bit late, but like I say, better late than never, right? This week, we're going to have the normal format for the podcast. Segment 1, we're going to talk about transforming your organization, and more specifically, a couple of guidelines on things that you should consider when thinking about or working on making changes within your organization to try to make that organization more innovative, more creative. Segment 2, we'll talk about weak signals. In this case, we're going to talk specifically about looking at alternative industries that are not aligned with your own, and as a source of weak signals, early ideas that you can apply to your business. And then segment 3 will be the killer question of the week. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Segment 1, talking about transforming your organization. We all sit back, particularly if you're a listener to this podcast, or maybe you also listen to some of the other ones, such as the Eureka podcast on creativity. Part of the challenge here is that many of us, being very creative, also find our own organizations potentially very frustrating because of the way it's organized, the way it's run, and potentially some of the restrictions that it puts on us as being highly creative people in being able to implement some of the ideas, or to get other people within our organization to think more creatively and to be more innovative. And I came across an article some time ago and did a little bit of research around some work that's being done in all places in the nursing home industry. There's a gentleman by the name of Bill Thomas and his wife Jude run a series of nursing homes called the Eden Alternative. And the Eden Alternative really is kind of a very creative way to think about running your nursing home. Traditionally in nursing homes, it's very much run like a traditional medical facility. It has the strict guidelines. Everybody operates on a schedule. Very typical command and control. There's a director of a nursing home. There's head of nursing, head of activities. Very, very much like what you would see in any kind of corporate enterprise business. In today's economy, and really the prediction going out for the next 30, 40, 50 years, is literally a huge explosion in the marketplace in the nursing home industry itself. My wife and I have some familiarity with the nursing home industry, both from a personal family situation, but also the amount of volunteer work that my wife and I and my kids do every weekend at two of the local nursing home facilities. And seeing this up front, kind of the industry as it is right now, you can see that it clearly is very ripe for change. Given that the market is going to expand, those people in that industry who can look and identify new kinds of creative approaches are clearly the ones that are going to win. In the case of Bill and Jude, they have come up with a couple of different ways. I shouldn't say a couple, but they've come up with kind of a framework or a foundation for how do you change the overall running of a nursing home facility to have a number of changes or impacts on the people's lives. Today, with the Eden Alternative, I don't know, there's probably up to a couple of thousand nursing homes that have adopted the Eden framework and have made fundamental changes. And these include, leveraging the entire organization to think differently about the nursing home, changing the purpose of the organization of the nursing home. What's its real purpose? Why is it there? And it's been interesting because a number of outside organizations have done studies, including the Texas Long-Term Care Institute in San Marcos, Texas, did a study and found that those nursing homes that have adopted the Eden Alternative have fewer infections, require less medications. The overall health of the residents are significantly improved. And some of the things that they do is for instance, is to allow the residents to do things like keep pets. So residents in a nursing home can keep a dog or a cat. Most traditional nursing homes, pets are not allowed in any way, shape, or form. In other cases, some of the Eden Alternative homes also have daycare centers for preschool children in the same facility with the elderly care. And so in this case, literally the residents of the nursing home actually help and work with the kids. The kids, in turn, help the elderly residents of the nursing home. And they literally have found that it's changed the entire outlook for these residents, giving the residents more control over their choices and how they want their care. Very similar to the corporate enterprise market, where you let the customer make the choice and have more control over the decisions of what they buy and how they interact. And as a result of this, the organization that runs it, again, the Eden Alternative, run by Bill and Jude Thomas, have put together kind of a series of lessons learned that they have when trying to transform their organization. And I believe, after reading these in detail and having done some looking into how they run their nursing home facilities, I think it applies really to any business. So, what are the guidelines that Bill and Jude have put together when you think about how to make a difference, or how do you change your organization to be more creative and more innovative? One, you need to have a good story to tell. Stories, literally not the story from the pitch or the spin, but literally create a personal story. Stories help people understand your ideas. It's through your passion, it's through the way you tell the stories that's going to inspire others to get on board, to make your vision a reality. You literally need to go out there and think like a storyteller. Don't worry about your PowerPoint slides and the graphics. It is literally telling a story. In fact, in a future podcast, I'll talk a little bit more about how to do the storytelling portion of this. There's actually an excellent book put out by one of the head trainers at the World Bank, talk about what they call springboard stories and how to use those to ignite the passion of your organization. So again, number one is have a good story to tell. Second is create your own language. Every industry, every business has its own language. And in many cases, the language literally grows out of your story. It grows out of your business. It grows out of creating literally word images in the minds of your customers and in the minds of your employees. Number three, don't mistake tokens for real change. A lot of organizations talk about wanting to be more creative, more innovative, and they'll do token changes. They'll put up, God forbid, those inspirational posters on the wall of your office, or they'll bring in some outside consultant at some kind of all-hands meeting to kind of do the motivational rah-rah speech. So be careful. Don't mistake tokens for real change. There aren't any shortcuts to the transforming of an organization to be more creative and more innovative. And unless you change the culture and the philosophy of the organization, there's really not going to be much in the way of long-term differences and long-term change. Next is make innovation a group activity. It's not limited to the senior executives. It's not limited to the strategy team. It's not limited to doing it once a year when you do your business planning. You literally have to create it a group activity, get the entire organization focused around using creativity or innovation to make change. I mean, the reality is no one person within an organization can have all the answers for how do you improve or how do you change your business or how do you respond to competitive threats. And so therefore, learning from others, learning from other industries, listening to this podcast, listening to other podcasts, are all tend to be sources of ideas, but you have to be able to leverage the entire expertise of the entire group, your entire organization. I mean, I'm a big believer of kind of the model of open source innovation. It isn't that important about who created the original germ of an idea or who was the one who brought an innovation forward and made it successful. It really is around allowing the group to feel group ownership, group passion around the changes for that. And then last but not least, expect setbacks. Failure is an inevitable part of the change process. And in many organizations, as change is being implemented, it's very easy to get frustrated. It's very easy to continually run into the wall and eventually get to the point where you feel like just giving up and walking away. That's the point where the winners from the losers are decided. It's those organizations, those individuals, those real change agents within an organization that's going to transform either the department or an entire company to be more innovative, more creative, find that breakout approach, modify, or I should say improve the culture to be more open and more resourceful, is when the individual, that change agent, finally just makes that decision to continue to push and push that one last time to get that breakthrough. Change is hard. Organizations are resistant to change. Individuals, we as people are reluctant to change. So continue to expect the setbacks as you go through and try to change or transform your organization to be more innovative. So again, just to run through the list one more time. 1, have a good story to tell. 2, create your own language, create your own words, paint those word pictures. 3, don't mistake tokens for real change. 4th, make innovation a group activity. If you're going to change the culture, change the culture for the entire department, the entire organization, you need to create an open environment, an open source environment for innovation and creativity. And last but not least, expect setbacks. Don't let the frustration prevent you from succeeding in making the changes that you know are the right ones that need to be made within your organization to transform it to be more creative and more innovative. On to segment 2, weak signals. One of the common questions that I get from listeners of this podcast and from people that I run into out in industry who know that I have a real passion for innovation and for ideas. One of the common questions is where do you go search to come up with all the ideas that you come up with? And the reality is that if you look around within your own industry, you just tend to end up copying what everybody else is doing. One of the catalysts that I use quite regularly is to look at alternative industries that are not closely aligned with the industry that I'm involved with. So how do you identify? Well, there's a number of industries that are closely aligned to each other. So for instance, the computer technology industry and the telecommunications industry, very, very closely aligned. And so therefore, you find that the ideas kind of flow back pretty easily. Same thing with financial services industry and computer technology. Again, very closely tied to each other. What I tend to do is I want to look for industries that are far afield, that are not aligned with these industries, something that is totally way out there, something that is literally two leaps from the industry that I'm involved in. So what are some of those? Well, industries that have what we call very low correlation. And what we mean by low correlation is they have a very low dependency on each other from the standpoint of having impact in the respective industries. And low correlation is actually a financial industries term. It's used for determining or calculating your stock portfolio investments. You don't want to have a lot of industries that have a high correlation, because if one industry suffers a setback, for instance, the telecommunications industry, it tends to have a ripple effect into other industries, such as computer technology. So industries that have a low correlation that you should look to find those next creative weak signals that could be applied include, if you're in the computer technology field, you can look to, for instance, the oil industry. Oil industry has a lot of expertise in research and exploration, the way they use mathematical models. So there's a number of ways or things that you can think of from the oil industry that potentially could apply to computer technology. Other industries include pharmaceuticals and the telecommunications industry. The other is financial services and the telecommunications industry. Transportation and the computer field. Biotechnology and the financial services industry, oil and pharmaceuticals, and computers and pharmaceuticals. So again, here's a list of 7 correlations, depending on what industry you're in, to where you can go and look at another industry, read the magazines that are put out by the industry, look at patent portfolios that other industry is developing, look at the R&D, look at university research into these alternative industries, and look at government-funded R&D in these alternative industries and see how they can potentially correlate back to what you are working on. So I want to talk about specifically one example in this case, which is biotechnology and financial services. One example that's come out of this is that in the case of biotechnology, they've been developing computer models both on what's called swarming. So think of flocks of birds, and you look at a flock, it's sitting out in a field, the flock gets disturbed, it takes off, but it tends to act as an entire group as it moves around in the sky and then slowly settles down in a new area to settle down either in the trees or on the ground. But it tends to act as one unified body. They tend to stay together, and you literally see this swarm effect that is flying around. Same as if you look at ants. There's actually a very good book, and off the top of my head, I can't think of the title of it. I think it's called Emergence, but I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. But there's a study on how ant colonies operate. So when you think about the ants, how do they go find food? How do they find themselves back to the nest? And literally in an ant colony, there are jobs such as garbage collectors. There's literally, when an ant colony is created, they literally set up an area which is literally the graveyard. So ants that pass away, the ant colony will literally place the dead ants in a very specific location and literally an ant graveyard. But everybody has, in an ant colony, has their jobs, and it's not communicated from the standpoint of traditional communications like we have in the human race, but literally jobs are divvied up, the colony operates, and it operates as a unified unit. So what does that mean in the financial services? Well, some computer scientists, particularly at the Santa Fe Institute, which studies chaos theory, have developed these software programs on swarming and ants and using them to predict stock markets. So when you think about us as individual investors, organizational investors, you tend to get this kind of herd or swarm effect where one person does something and all of a sudden the entire herd lines up behind it. Why do you see these the big swings in the stock market? Because when certain key trendsetters jump into the market, everybody else jumps into the market. When someone or key trendsetters jump out of the market, everybody jumps out of the market. And these movements tend to be literally swarms from the standpoint of large movements of buy and sell decisions. And so the financial market is using these computerized models to take a look and see if they can learn from the studies that have been going on in biology and apply them to market predictions in the stock market. So that's just one example of looking at alternative industries as a source of ideas, as a source of weak signals in order to determine or to leverage that for your own industry, and therefore for you to create and control a key innovative direction being applied to your own business. On to segment 3. This week's killer question is, who uses my product because of some benefit I did not foresee? So again, this week's killer question is, who uses my product because of some benefit I did not foresee? Now, this is kind of a hard one for you to just naturally go out and find. You have to be listening very closely to your customers and for their feedback in order to determine, who's buying your product, and your product is maybe positioned to do one specific function, but your customers have identified some kind of new alternative and are applying it completely different from what your plan is. I was reading on my flight back from Singapore, Guy Kawasaki's book called The Art of the Start. For those of you who are not familiar with Guy, he's one of the original Apple evangelists for the launch of the Macintosh, has gone on to write a number of books, and now he's with the Garage.com venture capital firm as its managing partner. And I was reading in Guy's book, and he gave a specific example that immediately triggered this question that was already in my personal deck of killer questions that I use for brainstorming ideation sessions. And I thought it was just a perfect example of what is an outcome from this specific question. So again, the question is, who uses my product because of some benefit I did not foresee? And the example that Guy gives in his book is around a Chinese pharmaceutical company named Kuning. And the objective for Kuning in the pharmaceutical industry was they wanted to make a child-proof aspirin bottle. They wanted to cut down on the accidental overdoses and children ingesting drugs from their parents' medicine cabinet that they shouldn't take. So Kuning created a child-proof bottle that had 13 moving parts and took 39 steps to open. Think about that. 13 moving parts and 39 steps to open. I remember as a kid when child-proof medicine bottles first came out, my grandmother always asked the pharmacist to get rid of that and go back and give her one of the other bottles because she couldn't figure out just the simple squeeze and turn that we have on the child-proof medicine bottles here in the U.S. So here, these guys created a medicine bottle, 13 moving parts, and it took 39 steps to open. And then for added safety, the company changed the design every 6 months. So if a child did figure it out, the next time the parents went and got medicine, it would be a completely different design, different steps that required to open up this medicine bottle. The problem was that the adults hated it. They couldn't remember the combination to get into the medicine bottle. However, what the company found out, though, was that the adults were buying the medicine bottles and gave it to their kids as puzzles. So literally every 6 months when the company was designing this new child-proof medicine bottle, it became a popular item with the adults to buy it and give it to their kids to be used as a puzzle. And so now the company is literally developing a series of these puzzles that adults can buy and give it to their kids as an ongoing feature or new kind of product offering. So again, kind of interesting twist on their intention was to create a medicine bottle that was childproof. They went to a little bit of the extreme in the feature and function. The end result, though, is a very popular product that's being used not for the intended purpose, but for something totally new. So again, this week's killer question is, who uses my product because of some benefit I did not foresee? And with that, we're going to wrap up this week's show. Thank you for listening. Please send feedback. You can send feedback to podcast@killerinnovations.com. The show notes, including links, anything that was referenced in the podcast, I'll post those up at the killerinnovations.com website, so feel free to check that. I've gotten a couple of emails from listeners wanting to know when I will be at certain industry events. So the one that's coming up here actually in 2 weeks will be at Supercom. I will be giving 2 speeches, one on Tuesday. I think it's like 11:30 Chicago time. And then I will be giving the lunchtime keynote speech at Supercom on Wednesday. So if you happen to be at Supercom, please stop by Tuesday or drop me an email and we can set up a specific time to meet on Tuesday. Wednesday, I will be flying from Supercom directly to Italy for another speaking engagement. So Tuesday would be my preference. And then I have a whole series of events that I'll be appearing at throughout the summer. So what I'm planning on doing is I'm going to collect my calendar on those, and I will post those up on the website so that for those of you who are going to be at industry conferences such as the International Broadcast Convention in Amsterdam, I will be speaking at that event. I will be speaking at a number of events in Asia in the late summer. But I'll post that schedule up on the website. And if any of you happen to be at any of these events, please let me know. We can get together, grab a drink, maybe grab dinner, and we'd have an opportunity to at least meet and share kind of our common interest and our common passion around creativity and innovation. So again, please send feedback, podcast@killerinnovations.com. Also, you can phone in your voicemail comment to the feedback line, 703-636-4460. And any interesting questions posed on the voicemail line, I'll play those back as an audio in the podcast and answer any questions you have directly in the podcast. With that, I thank you for listening. Don't forget to vote. Voting on Podcast Alley for your favorite podcast restarts at the first of the month. So as of June 1st, you can go out and vote. And like I shared the last time, those of us who do produce these podcasts put a lot of time into them. You know, it could be 6, 7, 8 hours for a 30-minute podcast for preparing the material and the research and the writing. In the way that the podcasts producers, from the standpoint of getting their feedback and kind of getting the satisfaction of that their podcast is providing value, is based on the feedback that we receive and the voting. So again, please vote if you like the podcast, and also share with others. Let others know if you are getting benefit from any of the podcasts that you listen to. Also, real quick, don't want to forget, I've recently aligned myself with some of the other podcast networks that are out there. Most recently now I am listed over also on the Tech Podcasts So this is a collection of technical podcasts, including the Slashdot Review and Chris Perello and his show. So feel free to go over to the techpodcasts.com website. You'll see the other members of that network, and you'll find, again, some very interesting content, some great group of people over there producing some really great podcasts, so check that out. So with that, again, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.